Okay, let's dive into a real historical whodunit. We're talking about an intellectual giant, a name everyone knew in his day, but now he's pretty much a ghost. So how on earth does someone so important just get erased from history?
I mean, just look at this contrast. It's pretty wild. Back in the 17th century, John Owen was an absolute force. We're talking Chancellor of Oxford University, chaplain to the leader of the country, Oliver Cromwell, probably the most important Puritan theologian of his entire generation. And today, he's literally called the Forgotten Man. His name only rings a bell for a handful of specialists. It is a staggering, almost unbelievable fall from grace.
And that, right there, is the central mystery we're going to try and solve. This wasn't just some slow fade into obscurity. No, this was a near total vanishing act. How does a figure of this stature get pushed so far into the margins? Well, let's follow the clues. So our investigation starts by building the case for his neglect. We're going to go full detective mode here and piece together the evidence that explains why John Owen was basically kicked to the historical curb.
Okay, so our investigation points to a few key clues here. First, he got shoved out of the mainstream by massive political changes. Then, academic trends shifted, and all his deep theological work just wasn't in style anymore. Plus, he got trapped between different academic departments and, weirdly enough, was dismissed by some because of the modern groups who were trying to keep his work alive. It was just the perfect storm for historical amnesia.
So here's a huge piece of the puzzle. For a long, long time, the folks studying the Puritans weren't really theologians. They were brilliant literature professors and historians looking at everything through a social or political lens. But that meant Owen's biggest contributions, his super dense, complex theological writings, they just weren't on the radar. It's like they were studying the frame but totally missing the painting itself.
And this is where it gets really ironic, a total catch-22. The very people who stopped Owen's name from vanishing completely also unintentionally hurt his academic reputation. You see, because his books were mostly published by conservative, sometimes fundamentalist groups, a lot of mainstream academics just wrote him off. They didn't see a serious 17th century thinker. They saw, and I'm quoting the scholarship here, an obscurantist precursor of some fearful brand of fundamentalism. Ouch. Okay, so we've seen why he was neglected. We've got the motive. But who was John Owen, really? To actually solve this mystery, we've got to uncover the man himself. We have to put him back where he belongs, in his own time.
Right. First things first, we have to stop thinking of Owen as just some English Puritan. That's way too small a box. He was a leading voice in a massive pan-European intellectual movement called Reformed Orthodoxy. You see, Puritanism was just the English version of a huge conversation that was happening everywhere, from Amsterdam to Geneva. This makes him a much, much bigger deal.
And believe me, this was not some dusty, boring tradition. Not at all. Owen and guys like him weren't just parroting what the first Protestant reformers said 100 years earlier. No way. They were in this lively, critical, back-and-forth dialogue with the entire history of Western thought, from the ancient church fathers right through the medieval philosophers.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. Even a famous 20th century theologian like Paul Tillich, who was definitely not a fundamentalist, saw this. He called this era a great achievement for one specific reason. Because these thinkers were in continual discussion with all the centuries. They were building on what came before, not just repeating it. Owen's ideas were also forged in the heat of battle. He spent his entire career debating two major movements that were challenging the status quo: the Arminians, who were rethinking free will and salvation, and the Socinians, who were questioning the very nature of the Trinity. His theology wasn't cooked up in some quiet library. It was a defense on the front lines against what he saw as seriously dangerous new ideas.
But if we're being honest, maybe the single biggest reason people misunderstand Owen today comes down to his method. He used a way of thinking called scholasticism, which relied heavily on the logic and philosophy of the ancient Greek thinker Aristotle. And yeah, to our modern ears, that sounds a little weird.
Which brings up the most obvious question, right? I know what you're thinking. If you're a theologian and the Bible is your ultimate authority, why on earth are you leaning on a pre-Christian Greek philosopher? Doesn't that just corrupt your whole project and make it totally outdated? It's a fair question, and it's really the heart of the case against him.
Okay, this slide is going to help make this click. Let's use an analogy. Back in the 17th century, Aristotle's philosophy wasn't just one option among many. It was basically the intellectual operating system of the entire Western world.
It gave everyone a shared language and a set of logical tools for science, philosophy, everything. Think of it like how data science is today. It's a language and a toolkit that's used to analyze everything from business to sociology.
So here's the bottom line. For Owen to just ignore Aristotle would have been like a sociologist today trying to analyze society without ever using the concepts of data or economics. It would have made him totally irrelevant. Using those tools wasn't a retreat into the past. It was a sign of his deep engagement with his present. He was speaking the language that everyone understood.
All right, so we found our guy, we've cracked the case, put him back in his context, and we understand his methods. But so what? Why does this one forgotten theologian from 400 years ago matter to us? Well, let's look at the final verdict and what it tells us about history itself.
What's so useful about Owen's story is that it gives us a perfect playbook for how a major figure gets lost to time. Step 1. A person exists in their own specific context. Step 2. The political and academic winds change. Step 3. Future generations show up with their own, totally new interests and biases. Step 4. They judge that historical figure by their modern standards, not the standards of the past. And the result? The person gets marginalized, turned into a cartoon, or just erased.
And this all leads us to the biggest takeaway of all. The curious case of John Owen proves a really profound truth. History isn't some fixed, objective story carved in stone. It's a narrative. And that narrative is constantly being edited, reshaped, and rewritten based on the priorities and the blind spots of whoever is telling the story.
When you get right down to it, Owen's story is a huge cautionary tale. It shows just how easily history can be rewritten, often by the winners. And it leaves us with a pretty challenging question to think about. Who are the giants of our own time that future generations might just decide to forget?